There are moments in human understanding where a single question, asked seriously and explored with genuine intellectual depth, has the power to completely reshape the way you see the world around you. And the question at the center of this video is exactly that kind of question, because when you ask what would happen on day one, if Israel, the United Kingdom, and France simultaneously declared war on Russia, you are not asking a simple military question, you are pulling on a thread that unravels the entire fabric of modern geopolitical order, global security architecture, nuclear deterrence theory, alliance systems, economic interdependence, and the delicate balance of power that currently keeps the world functioning without a direct confrontation between major nuclear armed states. What makes this scenario so intellectually compelling is not its likelihood, but rather what studying it carefully and seriously reveals about how the modern world actually works beneath the surface of diplomatic language and political speeches. Because when you strip away the formalities and examine what would genuinely happen in real time, in real institutions, in real military command centers, and in real financial systems the moment three significant world powers formally declared war on Russia together, you begin to understand things about global power that textbooks rarely explain with this kind of clarity, and that is precisely what this video is going to do for you, section by section, with full educational depth. The moment Israel, the United Kingdom, and France jointly transmit a formal declaration of war against the Russian Federation through official diplomatic and legal channels, every major government institution on the planet enters a state of acute emergency response, because this single trilateral announcement does not merely signal the beginning of a military conflict. It fundamentally destabilizes every assumption upon which the current international order is built, forcing governments, militaries, financial institutions, intelligence agencies, and international organizations to simultaneously recalibrate their entire operational posture within minutes rather than hours, as the declaration triggers automatic legal, military, and diplomatic mechanisms that were designed for exactly this kind of scenario, mechanisms that have never been fully activated at this scale before, which means every response that follows is being executed under conditions of profound uncertainty and extraordinary institutional pressure. The Russian Federation's military command structure is specifically engineered to detect, interpret, and respond to existential-level threats with a speed and decisiveness that most outside observers significantly underestimate, which means that within the first minutes following the declaration, the General Staff of the Armed Forces of Russia activates a layered series of pre-planned response protocols that simultaneously elevate the readiness status of conventional ground forces, naval fleets, air defense systems, and strategic nuclear forces, not because a nuclear response is immediately inevitable, but because Russian military doctrine treats any formal declaration of war by multiple nuclear-capable states as a direct signal that the conflict could escalate beyond conventional boundaries at any point, and therefore every tier of the military apparatus must be prepared and positioned before the strategic situation becomes any less controllable or predictable than it already is. Perhaps the single most important dynamic that shapes every decision made on day one of this conflict is the reality that Russia possesses the world's largest nuclear arsenal. And the existence of that arsenal does not simply sit in the background as a distant theoretical concern. It actively and immediately shapes the military options available to Israel, the United Kingdom, and France in ways that are profound and deeply constraining, because any military action that could be interpreted by Russian strategic planners as a threat to the Russian state's fundamental survival automatically triggers a set of doctrinal considerations around nuclear response thresholds, and this means that every commander, every political leader, and every intelligence analyst on all sides of this conflict must simultaneously conduct their planning through the filter of nuclear escalation risk, which dramatically narrows the range of actions any party is willing to take. Understanding what day one looks like requires an honest and precise assessment of what Israel, the United Kingdom, and France each contribute to this combined military effort, because these three nations are not interchangeable military powers. They each bring a distinctly different set of capabilities, geographic positions, intelligence assets, and strategic doctrines that together create a combined force with significant strengths in certain domains and notable vulnerabilities in others. And examining those contributions carefully reveals that while the Trilateral Alliance would possess considerable air power, advanced naval capabilities, highly sophisticated intelligence networks, precision strike technology, and nuclear deterrence of their own in the case of both the UK and France, they would face the fundamental challenge of projecting that power effectively against a nation as geographically vast, militarily deep, and strategically prepared for large-scale conflict as Russia demonstrably is. One of the most consequential and least discussed dimensions of what would unfold on day one is the immediate and severe impact on the global economic system, because modern economies are so deeply interconnected through trade relationships, energy dependencies, financial markets, currency systems, and supply chains that a formal declaration of war between states of this significance does not wait for actual combat to begin before causing devastating economic consequences. The declaration itself, the moment it is confirmed and transmitted across global financial networks, triggers a cascade of automated and human-driven responses across every major market simultaneously as institutional investors, sovereign wealth funds, central banks, commodity traders, and currency markets all begin repricing risk at extraordinary speed, creating a financial shock that spreads from Moscow to London to Tel Aviv to New York within minutes of the announcement becoming public. The declaration creates an immediate and extraordinarily complex dilemma for the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, because both the United Kingdom and France are full NATO members with all of the rights and obligations that membership entails, while Israel operates outside the NATO framework entirely, which means the alliance must simultaneously determine whether the actions of its two member states trigger any collective defense obligations for the remaining members. Whether Russia's eventual military response against UK or French assets or territory would constitute an attack requiring a collective NATO response under Article 5, and whether the organization as a whole distances itself from or actively opposes a war that two of its most powerful members have chosen to enter, all while managing the reality that any misstep in how NATO responds could either escalate the conflict dramatically or fracture the alliance's internal cohesion permanently, long before a single conventional military engagement occurs on day one. The conflict is already being fought with extraordinary intensity across the invisible domain of intelligence, cyber operations, and chronic warfare, and information systems, because modern great power conflict does not begin with tanks crossing borders. It begins with the aggressive and immediate effort by all parties to blind, deceive, disrupt, and penetrate the information networks upon which every subsequent military and political decision depends. And in this domain, Russia possesses decades of accumulated experience, sophisticated cyber capabilities, and a vast network of intelligence assets positioned across Europe and the Middle East that would be activated immediately upon the declaration, while Israel's renowned intelligence apparatus, combined with the signals intelligence capabilities of the United Kingdom, would be operating at their absolute maximum capacity from the very first moment. While military commands and intelligence agencies operate according to pre-planned protocols, the experience of day one for civilian populations and democratic governments is characterized by a combination of genuine shock, rapidly escalating anxiety, and the sudden realization that the abstract concept of major power conflict has become an immediate lived reality, because citizens in the United Kingdom, France, and Israel would be receiving emergency government communications, watching financial markets collapse in real time, witnessing the activation of civil defense systems, and processing the profound psychological weight of understanding their nations are now formally at war with a nuclear-armed superpower, while their elected governments simultaneously face the challenge of managing public communication, maintaining social order, sustaining economic function, and making decisions of civilization-level consequence under conditions of extreme time pressure and radical uncertainty. No serious analysis of day one is complete without examining the role of the major powers who are not direct participants in the declaration, but whose responses will profoundly shape how the conflict develops from its very first hours. Because the United States finds itself in an extraordinarily delicate position as a close ally of all three declaring nations while simultaneously bearing the greatest responsibility for preventing nuclear escalation, China must calculate how this conflict affects its own strategic competition with the West and its complex relationship with Russia, and a range of other significant powers including India, Turkey, Saudi Arabia, and the Gulf states must each determine where their interests lie and what posture they will adopt, with each of those decisions sending signals that influence the calculations of every other actor in this rapidly evolving and deeply dangerous situation. What studying day one of this scenario with genuine seriousness ultimately reveals is not a story about war itself, but rather a profound and clarifying portrait of how the modern international system actually functions under maximum stress, because every institution, every alliance, every doctrine, every economic system, and every decision-making structure that humanity has built over generations gets tested simultaneously the moment a conflict of this magnitude begins. And what becomes clear through this analysis is that the world is simultaneously more interconnected, more fragile, more carefully balanced, and more dependent on restraint and communication than most people appreciate during ordinary times, which means that the greatest insight the scenario offers is not about destruction, but about the extraordinary complexity of the systems that currently stand between the world as it is and the world that day one of this conflict would create. If this analysis gave you a genuinely deeper understanding of how global power, military strategy, and international systems actually function in the modern world, then this channel is exactly where you need to be. Because every video here is built on the same commitment to serious educational, depth-first exploration of the geopolitical questions that matter most. So take a moment right now to subscribe so you never miss an analysis. Share this video with someone who thinks carefully about how the world works, and leave your perspective in the comments below, because the conversation that happens in this community is just as valuable as the content itself.